Welcome to Christ in Private Practice, the podcast for Christian counselors building bold, sustainable practices with Christ at the center. I'm Camille McDaniel, licensed professional counselor, here to offer faith-based support, business insight, and creative strategies to help you thrive. Let's grow, be encouraged, and take action together. Welcome back to another episode of Christ in Private Practice. It's so nice to have you join. And if you're new, welcome. I hope you stay for the ride. As you can see, today we have a guest. It's always enjoyable to have an opportunity to talk to other mental health professionals. And so today we're going to be talking to Shantia Sturman, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, because we are going to be talking on the topic of treating eating disorders as a Christian counselor and what you would need to know if that is something that you desire to do, or if it even pops up in your practice. So first, let me share a little bit about Shantia, and then we will go from there. As I said before, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she specializes in eating disorders and body image and the integration of faith and mental health. And she helps her clients move beyond shame and control and perfectionism by addressing the deeper roots of disordered eating through both clinical care and thoughtful approach to faith. And Shantia is passionate about guiding others toward lasting healing, freedom, and a restored relationship with their body so that they can live more fully and pursue their God-given purpose, which is perfect for our channel and how we are desiring to move forward in helping the clients that come to our practice. So hello, Shantia. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, then we're going to jump right on in and you help us since this is your
Okay.
specialization. Absolutely. Just tell us, help us to understand, what eating disorders are. I know that many of us have heard of eating disorders, but not all of us actually work with it. And we may have a very surface level understanding. So could you start there from a clinical perspective, letting us know what is an eating disorder?
Of course. So I'd say just the most basic explanation of it is um, where you see impairment in a person's eating. You might find that some people have body dissatisfaction that comes along with it. Others, that might not be the case. They may just have difficulties when it comes to food or um, just navigating food preferences. And it can just lead to whether that's health complications or just impairment in social functioning, work functioning, different avoidance behaviors. So, really, just food behaviors that can cause impairment in a person's life.
Oh, thank you. And so when you're working with somebody who struggles with an eating disorder, tell us about like some things that maybe we don't understand, maybe even something we minimize. Because I remember it's coming up in my mind very clearly. A very sweet person that I used to work with. I am not a specialist in disordered eating, but I was seeing them for something else, and they had a team that worked with them regarding their eating disorder.
Mhm.
But I learned of some things that I I didn't think about that went along with eating disorders and ways that people hid their eating disorder. Either way,
Mhm.
um, can you kind of help us understand a little bit about, what are we missing? What are some
Mhm.
early signs, especially with high functioning clients
Mhm.
who present like they may have an eating disorder?
It's a really good question. I think a really big thing that I've learned over the years is, and it may seem obvious to some people who are listening, it's not all about vanity.
Mm.
Sometimes for some clients that may be there, most of the people I meet, that's not it at the heart of it. And you can learn a lot by looking at some of the neurobiology studies and just how some individuals with eating disorders, the way that their brain processes food, some might experience anxiety in the presence of food,
Mm.
just immediately, where if you don't have an eating disorder, food can cause a lot of calm. When you're hungry, you eat and you feel you can think straight and you can move on to the next thing you need to do. If a person has anorexia, for example, they may experience a lot of anxiety after eating. So it's not just, um, I want to be thin or I want to look better for other people. There can be some things happening in the brain that are also impacting, and that's been really helpful for me to understand from a compassion standpoint when working with individuals with eating disorders. So that's something I think is really helpful to know and
Okay.
understand.
Again, so like you said, it's not always just about the look. It's not
No,
always because someone's trying to become a certain size for like popularity reasons,
right?
in culture, or things like that. But there may be other things deeply rooted that cause
Yes,
somebody to choose food, to deal with or to have an aversion to food.
of
Like,
course.
what are some of the things that you're seeing in your practice that are bringing people to a place where an eating disorder is the result? Like what could even be some things that maybe lead down that path of an eating disorder?
Mhm. Trauma, abuse, and that's not always the case, but, trauma, abuse, I think a lot of people I've met, are just these incredible people who have a lot to say, but have been, kind of shrunken by life circumstance or, bullying. I mean, it can be things that on the surface for other people might seem very simple,
Yeah.
or for other people might seem extremely traumatic, like death in the family, different things of that nature, and so, everyone is so different, but a lot of times there's something there, even if it's not a specific event. It may be just the way that they've learned to see themselves or the world, just based on
Mm.
a lot of different factors. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I think could be at the root of it.
I like that. The fact that there's not really one way that it looks.
Mhm.
There's not just one textbook presentation that then leads you to an eating disorder, which is why
No,
the mind is so fascinating. So it's
it
just
is.
all in how you're perceiving your experiences in this life, and some of those experiences may cause people to use food or have an aversion to food, um, in one way or okay. But
Mhm.
I'm learning. I'm learning as I'm talking to you. But
Good. Yeah.
so when a client does come and they have body image concerns, like what does that even look like? How do you evaluate whether you're looking at disordered eating or
Mhm.
if you're just kind of looking at overall dissatisfaction, like they just need to move their body more, or stretch more?
That's a really good question. Usually, I'm looking at what's the level of distress because I think, especially being a mom, you go into circles and postpartum and moms, and that's just not just mom, but you can hear a
Mhm,
lot of mom circles where, gosh, I wish I had my body this way, or I wish I did this, or but for a lot of them, it's not causing a lot of distress. They're still able to
mhm,
to
mhm,
parent
mhm.
and go to work if they work or have a relationship. They're not avoiding, they're not changing the way that they eat in a way that's leading to physical challenges potentially, or that can potentially lead to physical challenges. So for me, I'm looking at the level of distress it's causing and then the behavioral implications of that, and maybe even physical.
Okay. That's that's a good one. Cause yeah, it's funny when you were talking about, like, the moms, even though, like you said, it could be other people too.
Yeah.
My youngest still comments on squishy parts, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, yeah."
Yes. It's so common. Yeah,
But
like, what's there?
right. But at the same time, I'm like, "That's
Yeah.
life," and then
Yeah,
I
exactly.
kinda move on. Whereas,
That's the
that
difference.
might not be the case for everyone, and also, like you just kinda shared with us a little bit before, it may be much deeper than, just, "I want to fit in with,
Mhm.
the culture around me." It may have nothing to do with that at all, and definitely could be something, more severe that they've experienced in life. Okay.
Mhm. Yep, and I will say to what you were saying, culture
Mhm.
does and can play a role, and so, it can be a factor, even if it's not the, person that's not their everyday drive is to look a certain
Mhm.
way. Culture still does play a huge role just in terms of, like, the idealized body, and so it's still, even if that's not at the
Mhm.
forefront of someone's mind, it still does inform,
Ah.
body
Oh.
should look like.
Yes. Okay, these conversations are bringing up all kinds of memories because I'm thinking about, so as you say that, that does remind me of just some of the things that some of my friends experienced. Oh my goodness, when we were back in high school. things,
Really.
surrounding size and surrounding certain things that we wanted to present, and what you had to do in order to get to that size or present in that way to kind of be a part of what everyone else was doing because you didn't want to stand out and
Yep.
want to blend in. Okay.
Yep. Well,
Oh.
and two, something I hear a lot, especially with the kids that I've worked with and teenagers, I'll hear a lot of times mom is the one coming in with the
Mhm.
child. I have had some great dads too, but a lot of times it's mom and she'll say, "Well, the doctor said that my, at the time 5-year-old was obese, and so I tried to put them on a diet, or the doctor said I needed to put them on a diet, and that can really spiral because then I'll hear the kids say, I remember sitting in the doctor's office at 5, or usually it's a little later when the kid remembers at 8 or 10 being told that I'm too fat and that I need to start exercising. And some kids are just in larger bodies as kids, and then they start
Yes.
to learn to move and not have any issues with um negative thoughts about their bodies, and then it works itself out and it's fine. But when
Yes.
you start to hear from a very early age that something's wrong with my body, it can present issues that may not have been there, even though doctors are doing their best and mean well in saying it. It can just
Mhm.
create for the right situation, it can create some problems.
Oh, that's a good one because it then plants seeds early
Yeah,
that
it does.
kids and teens don't know how to deal with. So that it's not like they're always saying, I've come up with this great plan of action to have this amount of protein and this amount of veg and this amount of,
Right.
but instead it's usually I'm guessing. I don't want to speak for you as the specialist, but I would think that a lot of that population is just going to the quick fix. So they're
Yes,
not necessarily trying to get there. They don't even always know to get there a healthy
exactly.
way. They just know I got to get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's pressure, and I'm just trying to do the
Mhm.
right thing for my kid.
Okay. So then let me ask you this. What are some common mistakes that you've seen, like when assessing the seriousness of an
Mhm.
eating disorder?
Yeah, common mistakes, like, as a clinician,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, and I will say from personal experience, before I had training, I remember working with my first, eating disorder client who had bulimia. Um, f it was not, I didn't understand at what point this person would need a higher level of care,
Okay.
just because you're like, "I wanna help,"
Yes.
and there's no one else who's helping this person, I wanna help, and
Mhm.
so, not understanding, like, what constitutes outpatient, what's inpatient, what's
Mm.
PHP, what's IOP. There's different levels of care, thankfully, but it's really important to know at what level can a person be helped best. And it could be easy to feel like, okay, but I love this client. We're working on these things over here. So let me just incorporate some body image things, a little bit, and then work on the trauma. But not understanding that a lot of times with these clients, we need to work on stabilizing food and
Yes.
body, and then we can move on to the other things, because if they're not eating, their brain isn't going to be processing trauma work. It's just our
Okay.
brains need the fuel. So
Yes.
I made that mistake early on.
No,
Um,
that's good. And thank you for sharing that because I think that's really valuable for us to take into account because we do care a lot about our clients
yeah.
and we may feel like that care can translate to us working through it
Yes.
and not knowing really how it presents. Because there are a lot of different ways that you can have disordered eating. Like earlier, you talked about anorexia. Right now, you're
Mhm.
talking about an experience early on in your career with bulimia. I remember having a client that, like I shared earlier, was getting help with a team for their eating disorder, but at one point had to go inpatient. So you talk about IOPs; those are intensive outpatient programs, or PHPs, partial hospitalization programs, and
Right.
then there are like inpatient
Mm.
programs. The person
Residentials,
stays
yeah.
residentials, yeah. And they were saying how they had to go to the bathroom with the door cracked, and I was like, "Oh, really? Why is that?" So, again,
Zero.
very new to me, and they were like, "Because I'd start exercising if they allowed me to close the door."
Mm.
And I was like, "Oh,
Yep.
wow. Okay, whoa."
Uh-huh.
So, like, understanding the nuances of the way some of the eating disorders really impact people allows us to not say, Well, like you said, I'm so glad you shared that because it's like, don't take these lightly.
Right.
Um, so okay, so then as professionals, how do you even approach collaboration? What does collaboration
Mhm.
look like with other professionals? Because that was something else that I learned along the way. I didn't realize how extensive some of the teams are for some
Mhm.
individuals who are struggling with disordered eating. How do you approach collaboration?
I love collaboration. It is the best thing because if I have a client, I mean, a lot of times as clinicians, we don't see the full picture. It's really hard to on your own. And so I love the dietitians I work with, the doctors, the psychiatrists. We'll talk. Some are a little more communicative than others, just I think based on schedule. But I love being able to get on the phone and say, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing? Do we feel like this is still appropriate at outpatient? Do we need to step them up?" I've had clients where we'll really work with them to say, "Hey, look, we wanna keep you at outpatient, but we need to see X, Y, and Z. We need to, see you really hitting your meal plan with the dietitian, otherwise this isn't safe for you." And so it even helps with motivating the client and helping them understand the severity of their own disorder, because a lot of times with eating disorders, you see the minimization, and again, for what I've seen, it goes back to the, "Well, is it really that bad? Do I really deserve this much help and support around me?" So a lot of the
Oh,
minimization.
yeah.
And so helping them understand, yes, it is this severe. And yes, you do deserve a team of people. And yes, we are going to let you know that we're not going to undertreat you because
Yes.
it's not ethical or
Wow.
right. It's just not right. But I love working in collaboration with other providers.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think that makes us sharper,
Mhm, it does.
because like you said, some people are getting one view, another person's getting another view. If you all can kind of come together, then you can best support the client and help them to move toward healing. Okay,
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah.
So what about when I'm sorry?
Oh, you're okay. I was gonna say even to know the right questions to ask because I can think of working with a psychiatrist, um, one in particular where she will share information where I think because my mind isn't working from a medical standpoint in that way, I didn't ask that question, but she got the answer, and so now I can incorporate that in my work with this client because I wasn't thinking about asking that very specific
Yeah.
question that she needed to prescribe medication. So it's
Yeah.
really helpful.
I think that that also then is, I guess, important to know, like, how is it presenting? And if this is not an area of specialization for me, which is why I think also this segment, this podcast episode is really important to hear all that says, hey, this is more than just we'll talk through it. Like
Yes, a lot
these,
more.
yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So then what about your clients who might come to you and they actually have a Christian faith base? So for those who come to you and they're believers, how are you integrating faith into the treatment process? Like, obviously without forcing it, these are clients who want it, but how are you integrating that?
Yeah. With any client who comes to me for Christian counseling, I always like to see where they at in their faith. Because a lot of times, especially if you have a client who's been struggling for a long time, a lot of times that comes with there's some anger toward God, or there's why hasn't praying helps this? Like, why can't I just believe more? And so you see a lot of the shame pop up in that way. And so I like to see where they at faith wise, so that I'm not 10 steps behind them or 10 steps ahead of them. So I like
Yes.
to assess and I just ask them and I say that. I just say, I want to be respectful for where you're at in your journey. And so help me understand like where you're at and where you want to be so that I can walk alongside you and not hold you back or get ahead and feel like you're being pushed to do something that you're not ready to do.
Okay. So again, like client led, and they can
Mhm.
they can share as much about
Yeah.
that that they want to incorporate it. Now, have you had an opportunity to either witness or even hear about like ways that faith has been used and it's not been helpful as far as
Mhm.
eating disorder population? And like, if so, can you tell us a little bit about that so that
Mhm. Yes.
we can
And I'll
avoid
start
these steps?
so we can avoid it. Yes. I'll start by saying that I see the heart in people and I see the good intention. And then I can see just from all the stories and things I've heard where it can be harmful. So one thing I see all the time and this comes from pastors, is they'll be on, if you don't have an eating disorder, if you don't work with eating disorder population, you may not catch it. But a lot of times pastors will talk about how they are on a diet, or how like oh, I had so much food this weekend. I need to go work out. And I notice it because I'll look at the pastor, and they're generally in a medium-sized body. And then I look in the congregation, and I wonder, for people who are really struggling with their bodies, the comparison. If this pastor I really respect is saying that they need to lose weight and calm down with their food, what is that saying to me? And obviously the pastor's not,
Mhm.
they're not intending
And
to make that connection.
yeah.
Um, but even as clinicians, just some of the things we might say about food, subtle things, can be misinterpreted, or just there could be messages that we don't mean to be saying.
Okay. This yes.
Something to be aware of.
Okay. I've heard, and not just for any particular diagnosis, but I have heard, like, about individuals saying, your faith would need to be stronger, or if
Yes,
if you
for
really
that
lean
too.
this or so. Yeah.
More.
And that yeah, and that kind of erases the fact that there are some things that do not go very easily, you
Mhm,
know, and there are some things that, yes, the Lord can absolutely help us with any and everything. He is the Lord.
mhm,
But there are still things in this broken world that do happen all the time. And sometimes just not having enough faith is not the answer. Yeah.
mhm. And I love explaining that to clients too, because you do see a lot of shame with eating disorders, and this is my fault, and obviously I'm doing something wrong. So there's not, for
Mhm.
many, it's not an issue of accountability. That's not, or self-control. It's not, or not caring. For most of them, that almost like they take it on too much. And so I like to explain to them, like, God can heal you in an instant. And sometimes, just like with other things in life, it's a process, and there's something
Mhm.
working in you for whatever reason. And so it's not, you're lazy and you're not working hard enough, and you need to spend more time in the work. We do need to spend more time in the work. And sometimes the healing comes in the journey and not just in the instant. And it's amazing what happens in the instant, but we don't always get that.
Yeah, you don't always get that.
We
Um,
don't. It'd be nice, but
And in all fairness, in his infinite wisdom, sometimes the longer route has been beneficial depending on what we're experiencing in
no,
life. May not be the most comfortable for
no,
sure.
not at
Uh,
all.
yeah. And so, okay.
Yeah, but it's true.
Yes. Now, for you in your practice, like, how do you even begin the process of helping your clients shift their view from, like, you know, the body being something you have to control or criticize,
Mhm,
uh, to something that kind of aligns more with the way the Lord sees us,
of course.
fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah. So the beginning part, I think, is meeting them where they're at, and helping them see that you understand, and then moving them to purpose. So
Okay.
purpose and freedom. And so not ignoring the body, but almost helping them see that your body is part of accomplishing your purpose. And so if we're caring for it, if we're moving in ways that make it feel good and help us to think properly and take care of the people that we're in charge, uh, we're called to steward, and the jobs and all the things, it helps us with our purpose. And so our body is a vessel, but it's not the end all be all. And
Mhm,
I think the
mhm.
important part is that first, helping them understand that you hear them, because if you say that too soon, it can feel like, well, you just don't get it. You just don't understand. You're just
Ah,
it can feel invalidating. And so I think as the relationship builds, and it's like, no, I hear you. I hear what the struggle is, and that is incredibly difficult. And so what do we do with that? And then helping them move toward, versus like, but your body's great. Let's focus on what God, there's a bigger purpose for you. That's very true. But when people are going through something, it's like, I just want you to see me first, and then we can talk.
oh, that's important because we then don't want to get in that loop. They term it spiritual bypassing. So it's like you
Right.
just throw all of the wonderful,
Yes.
joyful, like, things at
Mhm.
them. And then it's like, and that's supposed to make it all gone right now. So let's
Yes,
move
I'm going to fix it.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's fix it for you.
When
Yeah.
in actuality, I've heard, now correct me if I'm wrong because I don't know, but I've heard that, like, sometimes the journey to overcoming an eating disorder, it can be a little lengthy, like, because
Uh,
there can be quite a few setbacks. Is that accurate?
Very accurate. Yes. I've had clients where it's relatively short, maybe a few months, which is
Uh-huh.
incredible. But I have clients who I've seen for years. And so,
Oh,
but I also help them understand this isn't a shortcoming of yours. Like, that's not why you've been in
mhm.
treatment for
Yes.
longer than this person over here. It's just sometimes there's so many different layers, especially if there's trauma. And so it's like we're working on the food and stabilization, and then we're working on, whatever behaviors, and then we're
Oh,
kind of going
yeah.
down, and then there's
Mm.
a big life change. It's like, okay, so let's go back to stabilizing food. So
Oh,
sometimes it's just we're just trying to tackle one thing at a time, so it's not too much. It's not
okay.
overwhelming.
Oh, this helps to paint the picture though of what the journey can look like when you're
Mhm.
walking with somebody as they're trying to overcome an eating disorder, and why it's so important that if you suspect that somebody is struggling with an eating disorder, that you give them the referrals that they're needing.
Oh
Is
yeah.
that's not your area,
Yeah.
because there's some nuances that may, for those of us who aren't specializing in that area, some things that look just regular, but or look just like, oh, they're handling it fine, or I think we've got that. But someone, just like you said, the psychiatrist had a different view and just asked this one question this way,
Yep.
and it brought about all this information. You may also ask a question a certain way that those of us who don't have that experience in this area wouldn't ask, and it just like, oh, okay, I didn't know all of that,
Opens
thing.
up a lot.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So with your clients, generally, how do you even help them to start loosen that grip of control that the eating disorder has over them? I mean, not that you can tell us the whole thing right now, but
Of
I mean,
course. Of course.
what does that journey even look like? Because you mentioned already, like, sometimes it's processing some trauma,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like
Huge.
stabilization is something else you've talked about. Like, where does it all start then?
hmm Yeah. So once their food is good, or once we've kind of gotten the behaviors under wraps, then we can move on to trauma. Help I like to understand, like, how are they seeing the world, and what is that desire for control coming from? Because I shouldn't say we all, most of us, myself included, like some sort of control, whatever that looks like in
Right.
our lives. And so understanding, where does that come from? Because we're not all the same. So that doesn't come from the same exact place. And so getting down to the root of, what does this mean to you? What does it mean to you to have, if we're talking about a person who does have the desire to have a certain type of body, or who only wants to eat health foods all the time. What does that mean for you? What does that say about you? What does that say about the world around you? So understanding that, and then helping them understand, is it helpful? Like, is it, and not in a
Mm.
judgmental way, but in a, like, truly, is it helpful for you? Um, is it causing issues? And if it is, what are some other ways that we can achieve that same purpose that you're trying to find, but in a way that's actually gonna last and give you something that is more, like, free, gives you freedom,
Okay.
doesn't take away
Okay.
from your life.
So then, if you happen to have a client who is struggling with some of that control or not being able to let go because of their belief systems, their faith, maybe
Mhm.
even
Yeah,
holding on
it's
to it in
tough.
ways that are not healthy, like, how how do you kind of help them address that to move forward? Like, do you start to add more information on how they might be holding on to it in improper ways, or do you do something different? How does that even work when faith is
Mhm. It can get tough, and are you talking about, like, when people like, the idea of, like, I need to do more, I need to be more faithful, I need to, is that what you're referring to?
exactly, yep, like I'm not being faithful enough, or I've heard this as it relates to other things, or this is my punishment because
Oh, yeah.
certain things that happened, and so the Lord is punishing me, and he probably doesn't want me to get relief. He doesn't want me to feel better, because I've earned this, and this is probably just my punishment for that
Mhm.
or whatever. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it can be different
good
ways. I
question.
don't have enough faith, or like I'm being punished, and then it's like, okay, how do you kind of help them out of
Unravel
it?
that.
That's a lot of misinformation there.
Yes, I always like to give psychoeducation, because most people can't just make themselves have an eating disorder. I mean, I
Mhm.
would say all. You can't just, like, will yourself into doing it. And so I like to give education on just, like, where eating disorders come from, just the the different ways that they can come about. Obviously, everyone's different, but I like for people to understand this isn't just a spiritual thing. There's
Yeah.
biology, there's environment, there's the way that trauma shows up in our lives. And so I like to help people understand that it's not just the spiritual.
Yeah.
Um, and then that can kind of help them feel, okay, well, maybe there's a little bit more going on. And then challenge them, okay, if you're feeling like God's help me understand your view of God then. If
Mm.
if you feel that you serve a God who punishes you for X, Y, and Z, like just help me understand your view of God and your faith. And is that reflective of what you learned? Is that reflective of like where does that come from? Because most people will tell me, like, well, actually that's not the God I believe I serve. But for some reason I feel like that's how he relates to me. So then you could just start asking questions
Oh,
and
yep.
helping them just kind of think through it a little bit more.
Okay. Oh, good. That's yeah. I think you're definitely giving a good framework for how we can first make sure that we're understanding what it means to them
Yeah.
first of all, so that we don't want to assume, and that's a big one. We don't want to assume just because they say I would like my faith in Christ to be incorporated that we know exactly what that means, and that might mean 10 different things for 10 different people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
and
gotten it wrong before. I've
yes,
gotten it wrong before, so I had to step back and
yes.
ask.
Okay. That helps because I was gonna say, like, what about those of us who are, out there and they are interested in actually going into the realm of eating disorders and incorporating faith, and they're afraid of getting it wrong. But I believe that you really kind of, like, laid it out. It's like, getting clarity, asking the client, allowing the client to inform you of what that looks like for them. And even when you're like, "Okay, now think we had clarity," like, then you still are like, "Now what does God mean to you? What does
Yeah.
that how does that show up for you, to help them to kind of help themselves a little bit, with
Yes.
the process?
Yeah,
Okay.
because if we don't do that too, we run the risk of, especially if you feel like you're strong in your faith, you run the risk of almost perpetuating the same thing that has hurt them of like, let me
Mm,
tell you, like, let me tell you how to do this correctly. And a lot of times that's the shame that they're living in is like, well, I don't know how to do it correctly. So I need other people to tell me versus I need to have a personal relationship with Christ. That's what
mhm.
we need, not for
Yeah,
someone to tell them,
yeah.
obviously there can be value in that too, but helping them understand like,
Mhm.
no, he has given you the power to hear from him directly. And the shame is just, it's
Yeah.
creating barrier to where it's hard to hear.
That's a good one when you say you have the power to hear from him directly.
Mhm.
Because I have encountered individuals who definitely were like, well, I need to ask this person or I need to go to
Yeah.
that or I lean on this person for my faith, because why would God want to talk to me after I've done this or that or again condemnation, right, of
Mhm.
themselves. But it sounds like the way that you're working with the clients would allow them to feel empowered to have that personal relationship with Christ and not just what they want to maybe do is lean on you and
Yes.
you just tell them. And it's like, oh, no, 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 we're working
Yeah.
on you getting stronger. But then there's also that caution I'm hearing in there for the therapist to not try to be careful not to show up as like the superhero of the
Yeah.
story, but instead, as much as you may care, you kind of have to then, allow them to grow a bit more stronger and be a little bit more independent in that area.
Mhm.
Okay. Oh,
Exactly.
this is good. Okay. So then with your clients, as they're making progress, actually, what does progress look like? Like, what are some signs that you know that your client is actually, they're starting to really heal? Things
Mhm.
are in a good direction.
Yeah, which is my favorite part. Um, I mean, the most, I think, objective is beginning to see a decrease in behaviors. And so if a person was, looking in the mirror certain times a day, or if they were avoiding food or couldn't go to a restaurant with friends or family because of whatever the reason might be, or they're hiding food and binging, just looking at just objectively, are these decreasing? And so that's an important thing to ask, what does it look like this week? But I think the more broader answer to that would be freedom, like seeing them start to walk in
Mhm.
freedom. And so the things that they were held back from because of the preoccupation with food, and or with their body, they're able to like engage with people. You see their relationships start to flourish differently. They may take up different challenges that they once felt like they couldn't because, well, I have to eat at these times a day or I can't eat. And so I
Mhm.
start to feel lightheaded and I can't think. So I can't go to college. So when you can see like the college student go back to school or the athlete be able to compete again and not have the stress fractures coming up. So there's
Ooh,
physical kind of behavioral things you can see change. And then you see like the bigger, like they're starting to live their life.
I even as you're talking about it, just how much, the the biology of things like you just mentioned, like the college student who can't focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on what's going on and how the eating disorder shows up in that person's life, yeah, you may not be able to even sit through a full
Mm-mm.
day of classes.
Nope.
You know, definitely I've heard with athletes. Yeah, absolutely. So again, depending on how it's showing up, just kind of the internal changes that it causes that makes it so it's not necessarily safe to put all of that stress on your body, on your organs, on your muscles and bones and things like that. It's a
Mhm.
lot. Okay.
Yep. Well, even just the collaboration with other providers, because if you look at binge eating disorder, it may be a little bit more difficult to see. They may not be passing out. There may not be those, you may not have end up in an emergency room because they're dehydrated or, fainted. So you may not have that showing up. But when you're working with the doctor,
Mhm.
you hear like, okay, their blood pressure is going down. So those measures where it can be just as harmful, just different.
Yes.
And you may not be able to see it unless you ask a provider, like, hey, how are their health values? Like, we're weight aside, because that's not always a good way to measure someone's physical health. Like, let's look at their measures. Like, are they getting better cholesterol, those types of things.
Uh, that's true. That's really, again, goes back to it's not just when you're talking eating disorders, it's not just one thing you're looking at. Um,
Hmm.
as you're sharing that, then what popped up in my mind was dentist, and I was like, oh yeah,
Dentists.
I heard how sometimes the dentist is a part of it. Depending on, again, whether bulimia, whether anorexia, but sometimes there has been damage to tooth enamel. I mean, like, just so many different areas, yeah, and specialists that might be involved depending on what's going on.
Hmm.
So, if there was a clinician who wanted to get stronger in this area of specialization, or they not even in the specialization at all and said like, I feel called to start diving into this area, like what kind of starting point would you suggest as far as working with eating disorders, and also what kind of starting point if you wanted to integrate faith ethically and work with eating disorders?
Hmm.
What's
Yeah,
your
I
opinion? Yeah.
Yeah, I can share just my journey. I had an amazing mentor who has a IOP PHP program, and that's where I got started in private practice, just in general. And so, being able to see up close, I think it was helpful because outpatient, you're getting a different level of care or different level of severity sometimes, because not all clients know that they actually need to be at a higher level of care, but. Um, you learn so much treating higher levels where you're definitely needing collaboration with all the different professionals and it's built in. So you're not having to create the team on your own initially. And then you have someone where it's like, oh, actually, so when you told this client, like maybe they just need to go for some walks, let's talk about that because we
Oh.
didn't assess if they had an exercise addiction. Like you didn't assess that. So let's talk about that. So getting that the supervision was so helpful because you're gonna get it wrong. We all do. I think we continue to get it wrong, and then you correct yourself and realize I'm just human. But, those higher levels of care are great, and then also, if you can't do that, having a mentor or somebody who's a specialist who can, do consultation hours, I think that's huge.
Awesome. Okay, do you do consultation hours?
I don't. Maybe one day.
Okay, okay, because 'cause I'm like, so as we, tell us where we can find this, but yes, okay.
Yeah, maybe one day. There's a lot of eating disorder. If you look, consultants, if you look at, IADEPT, it's International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals, you can find supervisors who will you can pay them hourly for consultation and just say like,
Wonderful.
hey, this is what I'm seeing, and they can just give you all the, did you ask this question, did you ask, and I remember when my mentor asked, I was like, no, I didn't ask that question or that one or that one. Didn't ask any of the questions. And
Oh.
it's just it's nice to have the space to not know,
Mhm.
but have it be
Mhm.
safe because you're bouncing it off of someone who knows a bit
Yeah,
better.
there is safety in the ability to get, like, wise counsel from
Yes.
others who have been. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much. I know that we have gone through a lot of information in a short period of time, but I definitely think that it's valuable. And I think that others can definitely glean from this to see, is this somewhere that they feel they need to step into? Um, if they're being called, and then how to really understand the severity of what we're dealing with, so that if we
Right.
see these in our session, we know where to at least slightly go with it. Matter of fact, let me ask, if you had like a person like myself, I have had times where I've noticed clients have lost a significant amount of weight, and I will ask, or I will say something along the lines of, "Oh, I see that you have lost weight. Is this stress? Is this a new change in diet? Like, where is it coming from?"
Yeah.
Um, and so I wonder, is that a safe thing to say? When you're just trying to see,
Yeah. Kind of
because
assess.
I'm trying to figure out what are we dealing with here.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say so. It depends on the client. Some, like if they, for example, if we're talking anorexia, they might be like, "Yes, I lost weight." She noticed,
Right.
and you wouldn't think to like, so the phrasing could be, have you, just asking about food, like, how has food been lately? Have things changed? I'm just wondering. Um, and sometimes you can't avoid,
Mhm.
sometimes you just, because sometimes they may say, no, everything's good. So you may just have to directly say, okay, I am noticing some changes in your body. And I'm wondering if that is due to stress or if there's something else going on that we need to make sure that we're assessing and keeping safe. So sometimes you do have to ask because there can be some hiding
Yes.
behavior just for all the reasons. So
Okay.
um, initially you may just ask, like, how's food been? Tell me what a day looks like in terms of food, because food's good. Okay, well, what does the day look like? I had some yogurt for breakfast and granola bar for lunch and it was good. So then it's like, okay, but that for most people isn't going to get them throughout the day. So
Oh, that's
you kind
great.
of gauge, like, what does good look like for you food
Okay.
wise,
That
movement
actually
wise.
is really helpful, because then that way you're not necessarily saying, "I noticed that you've lost some weight," but you're just like, "Hey, so let's take an assessment." And you're talking about a number of other things in their life and assessing, and then you're like, "Okay, well, how's appetite been? How's food been?"
Perfect.
And then
Yep.
that's,
Yep.
thank you.
So
Thank you
yep.
very much.
Because then if they are, sometimes the noticing weight loss really reinforces, and it's like, ah, yes. And
Mhm.
it's not that they want it to be that way, not that an individual necessarily
Yeah.
wants that, but heard it many times when people start noticing weight loss and commenting on it, it
Yes.
can exacerbate, because it's affirming, especially in our culture. Like,
Yes,
you lost weight. Thank
yes.
you. You
But
know?
that's helpful because, again, for those of us who aren't specializing in it, but we're just noticing some changes in our clients, and we don't know if it maybe is something popping up or not. It's like, how
Right.
do we address that without, like you said, without then kind of validating
Of
something that we
course.
don't intend to validate? So that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, I know we're at the end of our time, but I know you have a website, you're practicing. Can you please let us know, like, where are you at practicing? Where are you licensed to practice? And how can people refer to you?
Yeah, so I am licensed in California, Oregon, and Florida. I live in Oregon, but originally from California. So
Mhm.
I'm licensed in those states. My website is, or my practice and website, Tapestry Counseling. My website's tapestrycounselingco.com. And yeah, if you could shoot me an email, there's a contact form on my website. Even if there's just questions or things people are curious about, I love to connect with other professionals. So feel free to reach out.
This has been good. Thank you so much, Shantia, for
Thanks
sharing
for
your
having me.
specialization and your knowledge with us. I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you. I loved being here.